Thank you, Gladys. That was great. That's my sister-in-law, Gladys Steinke. Anyway, good afternoon. Welcome. Nice to see so many of you here. My name's Betty Steinke, and I'm the part of the Health Ministries team here for the British Columbia Conference. And there's 9 of us on the team, and I was going to introduce them if they're here. They're coming. I know they're coming. So it's my pleasure to have Dr. Nedley here, who is going to be our speaker for the week. And Dr. Nedley probably doesn't need a lot of introduction. How many people have not heard Dr. Nedley speak or don't know anything about Dr. Nedley? Oh, okay, there's 3 or 4 hands. So Dr. Nedley is the founder of the community-based residential depression and anxiety program, and which is in Weimar. And one thing I do want to let everybody know is there is a training for the depression anxiety program that's going to be happening this week from Monday to Thursday. So Dr. Nedley is going to be speaking every day at 2 o'clock, and then right after that, there's going to be a training over in the room, the building 7 and 8. So for those of you, we have 25 people that have already registered. So if there's others that would like to register for this, just come and see me after. The cost of this program for camp meeting that we're getting it for has never been offered before. It's more than 50% off, so it's a really good time to get involved if you're interested in that. Also, Dr. Nedley is president of Weimar University, and he's published numerous scientific studies, and he wrote a book, which I love, The Depression, The Way Out. And he speaks all over the world, and most importantly, because of his ministry, many souls have been brought to Jesus, and that's really the most important thing. So it's really my pleasure to welcome Dr. Nedley, and Dr. Nedley, the time is yours.
Thank you. Well, it's good to be back at the BC Hope Camp Meeting. I've been here several times over the last few decades, and we have enjoyed it every time we've been here. But so far, at least on the times I've been here, this is the most cool weather that I remember. I remember not being able to even wear something like this, speaking, and close to 100 degrees. And even the participants were in shorts and t-shirts and would come with just sandals and no shoes. I remember years ago, Frank McMiller. Anyone remember Frank McMiller? Yes, so I don't know if Frank is here anymore. I think he's retired from the health ministries part of things. But there was going to be something I was going to be demonstrating that in the afternoon seminar. I was giving a morning meeting and an afternoon seminar. And he asked the question to all of the BC attendees, how many of you are wearing socks? And only about half of them raised their hand. And he said, how many of you are not wearing socks? And the other half raised their hand. And he says, well, this afternoon when you come to Dr. Nedley's presentation, I want you all to wear socks, because what you will hear will knock your socks off. And that was Frank. He was quite a promoter, and the place was filled up in the afternoon for everyone to find out how their socks could be knocked off. Well, this afternoon I'm going to be speaking about the evangelism part. As you know, there's a theme to this camp meeting, coming home, and that theme involves really a renewing of the whole person, body, mind, and soul. And that gets to the specifics of the presentation, where I'm going to be talking about belief and the brain. And so, in fact, that's what evangelism is about. You know, often when we think of public evangelism, we're going over beliefs of the Word of God. And as people adopt those beliefs and live by those beliefs, they want to join God's remnant church and be part of that. And so belief is very important in regards to that. But of course, belief involves the entire being. It's not just a knowledge of the truth. It's actually having the truth be part of us, living that truth that is part of evangelism. And one of the things I would like you to think about is how you can turn your church into reaching all ages and all classes in the community around you. I think when you're particularly doing health evangelism, and we'll get into the specifics of that, when you're doing health evangelism God's way, you will be able to reach all classes, the very wealthy. Most churches don't do well in reaching the wealthy in their community. Wealthy people won't come to an evangelistic series. Thank you. They aren't going to be seen in those type of settings, but they will come to your health seminars, and they will want to learn more about their physical health and their mental health. And so how do we connect with reaching the wealthier classes? How do we connect with those who would never want to go to an evangelistic series or a Bible study? The health message particularly is keen on that. But, you know, interestingly, it reaches even the lower classes. All ages, all classes can be reached by way of health evangelism, which, of course, is not just health of the body and health of the brain, but health of the entire being. Research in the last decade, and I don't know, do you see the, does it say research in the 1990s and 2000s up on the screen? Okay, I can't see your screen. But it's now well established that one of the main characteristics of virtually all depressed individuals, no matter what the underlying cause, is a significant decrease in the frontal lobe's blood flow and activity. And you know, one of the things I mentioned, all ages and all classes, depression and mental illness affects all ages and all classes. Someone was talking to me earlier, you know, when we run health programs, physical health programs, we get people primarily middle age and older. When you run mental health programs, you're going to get younger age people as well. In fact, mental illness is so common among our younger generation that they consider people their age that don't have mental illness to be the odd people. And they will state that very clearly. They know they have mental health problems. They know their mental health problems are significant. I could go into the statistics, but 1 out of 10 teenagers seriously consider taking their life every year. And about 2.5% of them will actually attempt to do that. And that's significant. And that's kind of older data. It seems to be rising exponentially in regards to mental illness. But notice, no matter what the underlying cause of the mental illness, you will see a significant decrease in the frontal lobe's blood flow and activity. This is the PET scan of an individual. It's actually a SPECT scan, which is taking a look at blood flow and activity. And the top of that brain is where the eyes are at. And so this is like Doppler weather radar. When you see that depressed individual, that frontal lobe is very suppressed, very inactive. And in fact, the entire brain tends to be pretty inactive. But this is after a 10-day residential program. You can see a marked increase in activity of that frontal lobe of the brain. And that will occur before the depression starts to clear up. And so a recovered person has to have that frontal lobe enhancement. And this is what is lacking in mental health facilities. Mental health facilities, you know, you have a serious mental illness, you get admitted to a psych institution, and they're not going to be dealing with the frontal lobe. Why? The frontal lobe is the center of spirituality, morality, and the will. And they're not going to get into spirituality and morality. They will maybe talk about decisions and the will to some extent, but they're not going to be doing things music-wise to enhance the frontal lobe. They're not going to be doing things nutrition-wise to enhance the frontal lobe. It's going to, maybe they'll do some cognitive behavioral therapy. That can actually improve frontal lobe function as we analyze our distorted ways of thinking and correct that. But in general, the frontal lobe is the neglected lobe in psychiatry today. But yet it's the most important in preventing mental illness and recovery from mental illness. And Drevitz presents compelling evidence that frontal lobe problems are the cause and the effects of the depressive symptoms. One of the reasons why depression is so rampant among the younger generation today is simply because they are participating in frontal lobe suppressants almost every day of their lives, and some of them for hours every day of their life. When your frontal lobe is suppressed due to your lifestyle habits and your thinking patterns, you are going to experience a mental illness. And it can be very serious as well. And so the world is very interested on how to prevent mental illness and actually help it. I've actually told our staff we could, if we chose to do so, because mental illness is such an issue today and so many people are interested in how we can solve this problem, that if we actually filmed live our program and filmed each participant a week before they got there and all their issues, film them during the program, and then film them after the program, it would be more watched than Super Bowl. It would be more watched than the Republican National Convention. It would be more watched than the Democratic National Convention. And certainly more than any soccer or sporting event, because everyone would be interested in this. And this is something that I think you ought to really consider if your church is not putting on mental health programs that get to the root of the problem. You have a wide open opportunity of reaching your community. And I'd like to encourage you, what Betty mentioned is true. I don't know how this actually happened. I wasn't part of it at all. But we've never often offered this certificate training for less cost. In fact, recently the cost has gone up significantly because we include the training as part of getting all the materials to be able to do all of that. And so when I realized what the Canadians did, I guess they're good negotiators with our team, but when I realized what the Canadians did, I said, this is going to be a one-and-done situation. This isn't going to be the case at all anymore. And so you can get certified to actually run this program and be part of a very exciting evangelism effort, as you'll understand. Now, interestingly, strong religious faith, this is published in the peer-reviewed medical literature, helps speed recovery from depression. Depressed people with higher intrinsic religiosity scores have more rapid remission than patients with lower scores. Patients recover from depression 70% sooner with every 10-point increase in religiosity assessment score. External religious activity had much less of an impact. External religious activity is where you're going through the forms of religion, but not the belief in religion. Let me just mention something about, I understand that we are in a Seventh-day Adventist camp meeting, but we treat people from all walks of life, all different religions. We had, in the program we just finished, we had a couple of Islamic individuals in the program. And the father was accompanying his son, who was 20 years old with some significant mental health issues, And he was actually from Canada, not this part of Canada, but the most populated part of Canada. And he was very concerned because he knew this had a spiritual emphasis. And so he called ahead of time, we are Muslim. We're not interested in being converted. We are not interested in, hearing this aspect of the spiritual program, and we don't want to be proselytized. Our staff had to tell them that we don't ask anybody to join our church. They have to ask to join our church. And I almost have tears in my eyes when I'm saying this, but 1 week into it, they were both in my office saying, "How can I learn more about your church?" Because we are just so impressed with the spiritual aspect and every aspect of the program. We've never heard anything like this before. And so, but I'm going into a little bit of intrinsic versus extrinsic religiosity. And this is somewhat public information, although nobody says it in the way I'm getting ready to say it. But in America today, you guys are aware of the two political parties. What are those parties? Yes, the Republicans and the Democrats. Let me tell you who primarily makes up the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party is primarily made up of atheists and Jesuit Catholics. That's the core of the Democratic Party. The Republican Party is made up of Protestants, primarily, and non-Jesuit Catholics. Now, there's a big division that the media won't tell you about in regards to the Catholic Church, but we've had people that are Catholics from both sides that come to our program. They have mental illness as well. And the Jesuit Catholics are what we would call the progressive Catholics. They're not interested in the Word of God. They don't study the Bible. They are pro breaking of the seventh commandment when it comes to things like homosexuality and things like, the big issue in America, you might have heard, is abortion. Abortion is a side issue, and no one talks about the real issue. We wouldn't have a problem with abortion in Canada or in America if we didn't have a problem with casual sex. Casual sex is the problem, and casual sex is breaking the seventh commandment. The seventh commandment does not allow for that type of sexual activity. And so when you have casual sex, you have a dire need for abortion. And of course, this was paganism. If you look at it in the pagan countries, even in Solomon's time, there were babies that were sacrificed. Many babies were sacrificed. Why were they sacrificed? Same problem, casual sex. They didn't have the technology to take them out and kill them earlier, although they were trying to develop it. But now they have that technology, and so we have this big, disagreement in regards to abortion. And by the way, I understand the disagreement. I have sympathy, in a way, on both sides of the aisle because I've seen what happens. One of the reasons why mental illness is dramatically increasing throughout the world is because of casual sex. Why? When you have two people that are coming together to have sex that are doing it for selfish reasons, and casual sex is about that. It's about self-indulgence. Both people, if it's consensual, and I'm talking about consensual sex, if it's consensual sex, they are both doing it for selfish reasons. If they have a child as a result of that, do you think that child is going to be less likely abused or neglected, or more likely abused and neglected, versus parents who have actually sworn an oath before people saying, "Until death do us part, in sickness and in health, for richer, for poorer. I'm committing myself to this person as long as" what? "Life shall last." Now, the progressive have changed that. Interestingly, they haven't changed it in the vows. I notice even when progressives get married, they'll say those words. But they don't remember saying those words, because all they remember is saying, "I didn't say that. I said, as long as love shall last." Well, wait a minute. That's not self-sacrificing love. That's not the agape love that we are swearing and vowing to this person for the rest of our life. And so when you're raised in a two-parent home by selfless parents, you are far less likely to get neglected as a child, abused as a child. You're not going to be being raised by alcoholic parents or those types of things, far less likely. And those people will have a lot more protections when it comes to mental illness. They might come into trauma and other things, but there's something called a developmental hit, adverse childhood experiences that set them up. And if you come from parents who were not willing to take that oath, almost, I won't say it's across the board, but almost without exception, you are going to have a lot of ACEs. ACE stands for adverse childhood experiences, because you will have been neglected when you shouldn't have been neglected. You will be abused when you should not have been abused. Because if they're selfish in their sex, they're selfish in raising those children, and they're more concerned about themselves than they are that child. And so that child becomes someone to manipulate, etc. So back to the two sides. The Jesuits are pro-abortion, pro-LGBTQ, not at all interested in the Bible, but they do the external forms of religion. They will go to Mass. Biden, by the way, comes from the Jesuit persuasion. The Jesuits are primarily in charge of the Catholic educational institutions in the United States. And so Georgetown, you name a Catholic institution, chances are it's of the Jesuit order. And the Jesuit order does not, and by the way, we have for the first time in history a pope who is what? Jesuit. And when it comes to LGBTQ, he was very famous. The media loved him for it. Who am I to judge? And if you look at all of that aspect of things, he's not, he's pro, he's without saying it because he doesn't want to offend the other half of the Catholics that don't believe in this. But it's very clear where his core beliefs are. And they're with the Jesuits, and he is a Jesuit pope. But the other side of the Catholic Church actually is interested in the Bible. They will actually read the Bible. And they don't believe in the breaking of the seventh commandment. And those individuals are ones that when they come across greater truths of the Word of God, they're much more likely to join. But once Jesuits are exposed to true Christianity and selfless love, they will also be willing to adopt the whole aspect of truth. And so the Jesuits, the reason why I'm talking about this is the difference. The Jesuits are the external forms of religion. The non-Jesuit Catholics have both. They have the intrinsic, they do the external things too, like the rosary and those type of things, but they actually have a belief in God. Jesuits, it's very hard to tell the difference between an atheist and a Jesuit, except one says they believe in God and the other one says they don't. But other than that, their beliefs are pretty well aligned across the board. And so, but intrinsic religiosity helps, not extrinsic religiosity. So there's two godly foundational principles that we will present in our program, whether it's the community program or whether it's the residential program. And those two godly foundational principles are truth and agape love. The Bible says God is what? God is love. And when Christ was there before Pilate, and Pilate realized he had someone that was not just a mere human being in front of him. And he asked the question, "Why have you come?" He could have said, "I came to save my people from their sins." Would that have been accurate? That's one of the reasons he came. But when he was in front of the government official that had the whole authority, life versus death in him, he says, "I came because of truth. Everyone that is of the truth heareth my voice." And we're told Christ is the way, the what? The truth and the life. And we're also told, and a lot of people don't understand God this way. So a lot of people that blame God for things. But the Bible tells us God is limited. There are things that God cannot do. Can anyone name anything that the Bible says God cannot do? He cannot lie. Now that's a big advantage that the deceiver has, because he's lying all the time. And lying can give you short-term advantages. But God will not be part of a lie. Now, he's a free moral agent. I'm not a theologian, but as a free moral agent, I suppose that he could if he wanted to, but he puts truth above himself. He will never violate those principles of truth. And truth will help us get out of mental illness. Everyone with mental illness has distorted ways of thinking. On the surface, it seems right, but when you dig deep, it's distorted. It's wrong. And so one of the things that we have to teach in every one of our programs, and if you teach this in your community program, you're going to teach people the 10 different ways that we can all get into distorted thinking. And it's exciting when people start to learn this. There's 10 different ways that I can think in a distorted manner. And now how can I catch myself in thinking distortedly, and then how can I correct that? And then, of course, there's other truths. There are truths about what we put into our body and what it does to our brain chemistry. Those are very valid truths that they'll learn about. So they're going to be learning about a lot of truths, but they're also going to be learning, because as you're teaching them the truths, or in the case of putting on your community program, you'll play on the video, and I will be explaining some truths, but after that's done, then you take them in a breakout session and you become their health coach. And so basically you're going to be certified to how can you be a health coach for these people that have significant issues. How can you get them from someone who's eating a very bad diet to now eating a healthy diet? How do you take someone who's not exercising or doing the right type of exercise to get them into doing the right type of exercise? And so that health coaching aspect, when it's done from a heart of love, is amazing on what it will do to these individuals, because often they haven't had people love them with agape love their entire life. Even their own parents did not live them or actually help them to understand agape love, because it was more of a self-centered love that those parents had. We're told before the Sermon on the Mount, there's a text almost identical to this in Matthew 4. Then we have the greatest sermon ever preached, and sermons do have a role in evangelism. And then at the end of that sermon, we could see that sermon as kind of the middle of the sandwich, but on both ends of the sandwich, we see this verse. Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the good news, the gospel of the kingdom, and healing which diseases? All kinds of disease and every weakness and infirmity. This is what we call the threefold ministry of Jesus. He educated, he was a master educator, he was a master proclaimer of the good news, the gospel, but he also did something that the vast majority of Christianity totally neglects. He did what? He healed. Where is the health message in Christianity today? I'll even say, where is it in portions of Adventism today? Sometimes you hear the health message criticized. The health message is to help us live life and to live it how? More abundantly. If you're against the health message, you're against life. And Christ is the way, the truth, and the what? And the life. God is all about life, and for us to live it more abundantly. Let's be careful about the critical things that we say in regards to the health message. That does not come from godly inspiration. It comes from the one who wants you to die earlier, to suffer, and to be tortured earlier. It comes from the deceiver himself. And unfortunately, Adventism, I should say fortunately, Adventism is way ahead in regards to other Christian denominations in regards to this. But the rest of Christianity neglects it almost completely. Interestingly, one of the reasons why they tend to neglect it is because of a false belief. You know which Protestant denomination has the shortest lives, at least according to a study that was done recently? Adventists have the longest life. We're kind of a blue zone, and particularly if you're a plant-based vegetarian. Which denomination has the shortest life in regards to the Protestant denominations? It's actually the Baptists. Why is it the Baptists? Well, the Baptists, in general, have a belief that's very pervasive. And as one Baptist I heard say, who was going into McDonald's, who was obese and overweight and already had heart problems, when I go under those golden arches, I know I'm on my way to the pearly gates. What does that mean? Just die sooner and you'll get to heaven. And you'll get to heaven sooner. So why worry about the health message? And so a lot of people have a misunderstanding of death. And this is one of the things. When we boil down the gospel, let's talk about the gospel here, because that's three. I know you're here, I'm going to talk primarily about the health aspect of things, the healing ministry. But today I might actually talk about more of the education part and more of the gospel part. But I think it's in 1 Corinthians. This wasn't part of my plan here today, but if you have your Bibles, 1 Corinthians, I think it's chapter 15. And let's see. Okay, yes it is. This is Paul now. Verse 15, verse 1. Now I would remind you, brothers, of the gospel I preached to you, which you received in which you stand, and by which you are being saved, if you hold fast to the word I preached to you, unless you believed in vain. So what was Paul preaching on all of his missionary journeys? He was preaching the what? He was preaching the gospel. And he said, I preached the gospel. Now, did Paul come up with this gospel? No. He said he received it. So he had received the gospel, and now he's sharing the gospel to them. For I delivered to you, this is verse 3, as of first importance, which I also received. So he makes it a big claim again. This is something that I received. And the gospel is summarized in 5 words. The gospel is simple. And he makes it clear this is what he got from God. You remember, with Paul's story, he was also in the wilderness. He was communing with God. He was a prophet as well. But he boils it down to 5 words. What are those 5 words? Christ died for our sins. If you want to understand the gospel, you just have to understand what those 5 words mean. And one of those 5 words is died. Christ did what? He died. If being dead is just entering another phase of existence, the gospel doesn't mean very much anymore. He was willing to be eternally wiped out for us. Death is not a new life, it is the cessation of life. And one of the reasons why Adventists live longer is they know what happens when they die. They're sleeping. They're not in heaven immediately. They are sleeping. They no longer have any thoughts. They no longer have any influence. And how long we live can be very much connected with how we understand those 5 words of the gospel. So this is the threefold ministry: teaching, education, the gospel, as well as healing. And it's one of the reasons why Adventists also have one of the largest educational systems. In fact, I think outside of the Catholic Church, we do have the largest educational system in the world for teaching. But that teaching also should be related to the truths of health and healing. The influence of the Spirit of God is the very best medicine for disease. What is the very best medicine for disease? The influence of the Spirit of God. Heaven is all health. The more deeply heavenly influences are realized, the more sure will be the recovery of the believing invalid. And I can tell you, with all of the things, after having so many countless residential programs and seeing so many lives transformed and seeing so many people commit to the gospel, and many of those have known certain truths already before they come. It's not like they're totally ignorant. But I've noticed one of the most impressive factors that helps turn people around is the Spirit of God working on our staff. Now, we only have 3 or 4 professional staff in a residential program. We'll have the physician, we'll have professional counselors, we'll have the spiritual counselor. Usually I have a couple of professional counselors. We might have another physician that's working with me. We do have a fellowship program now, so I normally do have a physician working with me as we're starting more and more of these residential programs around the country. But when they're through, in regards to their testimony, they'll talk about the great transformation that took place, but the most consistent theme is your loving staff. And they're not actually just talking about the professionals. They are talking about the professionals, but they're talking about, we have a lot more staff that are not professional. In other words, they're not necessarily licensed, but They know how to give good hydrotherapy treatments. They know how to give good massages. They know how to help people with loving accountability so that they get up on time. They're experts at waking people up in a loving way when people don't want to get up. And they're lovingly putting them to bed when they don't want to go to bed. And they're also saying things that are encouraging. They're helping them do things that they don't want to do, like the exercise or like the contrast hydrotherapy. And so the more deeply heavenly influences are realized, the more sure will be the recovery of the believing invalid. Now notice this statement. This one's a longer one. And this is one of the reasons why I transferred. I'm an internal medicine physician, so adult disease of the internal organs. And there's two things. I was just telling someone about this week. When I was in high school, people say, Neil, what are you going to do? What is your occupation going to be? What are you going to study? And I used to tell them, I don't know what it's going to be, but I know one thing it's not going to be. I am not going to be a physician. We didn't have physicians in our family. We weren't a healthcare family. My father was an engineer. And, my father, I owe so much to my father, but I did mention this just the other day. My father also had a good sense of humor, but he would tell us the difference between engineers and physicians. He says physicians or engineers have to live with their mistakes, and physicians bury theirs. So anyways, I didn't have an interest in being a physician. But then when I became a physician, what are you going to go into? I don't know what I'm going to go into, but I know one thing I'm not going to go into. I'm not going to go into anything that has to do with psychiatry or mental health. I had been in those psych institutions. They were depressing places. And it seemed like they never cured anybody. They just, sedated them to the point where they might not be dangerous to themselves and others, but it didn't seem to be very effective at all. And I didn't want to be wasting time in a profession, the way I was looking at it, that really couldn't do much. But boy, the Lord does have a sense of humor, because I'm a physician and I deal more with mental illness than I do any of those internal medicine diseases now. But notice this statement. Sickness of the mind prevails what? Now, imagine the day that she said it and the contrast with today. It's even more prevalent. Notice this. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their what? Foundation here. 9/10 of the diseases from which men suffer have their foundation where? In the mind. Now, when I first read that, I thought, wait a minute. The number one killer in America is still not depression and anxiety. It's heart disease. It's coronary artery disease. The number two killer is cancer. Those things don't have anything to do with the mind, do they? But then, when I was a young physician, there was a conference that I went to in 1991 that was called the First International Conference on the Elimination of Coronary Artery Disease. And they told us how we could eliminate it, completely eliminate coronary artery disease from the planet through nutrition and lifestyle. That was in 1991. There has now been over 30 years pass, and what do you think the number one killer is? It's still heart disease. Is it because they were wrong about that in 1991? No, we now know they're more truthful than we even thought they were back then. So what's killing? The number one killer? It's actually a disease of the mind. It's called lack of self-control. You know what you should be doing, but you're not doing it. That is a mind problem. That's not a heart problem. Harvard tells us 80% of cancers are preventable if we would put into practice what we know to prevent cancer. Why are 80% of people dying from cancer that do have deaths from cancer? It's not due to cancer, it's a problem in their mind. They weren't doing what they knew was healthiest for them. And so when you look at it from that perspective, I think it's even greater than 9/10 now. But let's go on. Perhaps some living home trouble is like a canker eating to the very soul and weakening the life forces. So where could the trouble be? Could be in the home. It could have to do with our relationships, which mental health, anyone who's involved in mental health is going to go into this. By the way, speaking of that, good, I still have some time, but I won't be able to get through this entire presentation, I don't think, but we'll still have some stories about that. In regards to home forces, well, no, let me just go through the entire quote, then I might tell the story. Living home trouble is like a canker, eating the very soul and weakening the life forces. Remorse for sin sometimes undermines the constitution and unbalances the mind. Remorse for what? Sin. Should we have remorse for our sin? Yes, but we should put that sin at the foot of the cross and repent. What does repentance mean? It means a changing of our mind. And that's what this whole threefold ministry is about. If we change our mind about something, that is repenting. But when we have remorse for sin, often those people have remorse for the consequences of their sin, but not really remorse for the sin itself, meaning that they haven't really changed their mind. And that will unbalance the mind. There are erroneous doctrines also as that of an eternally burning hell in the endless torment of the wicked, that by giving exaggerated and distorted views of the character of God have produced the same result upon sensitive minds. Infidels have made the most of these unfortunate cases, attributing insanity to religion. Has anyone heard that before? Religion causes what? Insanity. By the way, what party is the most in promoting that? Well, but there was a forerunner of the Democratic Party. The forerunner of the Democratic Party was the Communist Party. Communists, that was their big thing, is religion will cause insanity. Karl Marx believed it. Lenin believed it. All of those communist people believed it. And so they'll attribute religion as causing insanity. But she says this is a gross libel and one which they will not be pleased to meet by and by. The religion of Christ, so far from being the cause of insanity, is one of the most effectual remedies, for it is a potent soother of the nerves. What is a potent soother of the nerves? The religion of Christ. But what she's saying in the same paragraph is false religion can cause insanity. It's false religion that causes the issues. Let me give you an example. I don't know how many of you in Canada have heard of a person that was kind of a household name for a while. In Carolina, at least, her name was Susan Smith. Susan Smith told a story that her kids were kidnapped by an African American, and they went missing, and she didn't know where they were. And then eventually, those kids were all found dead, seatbelted into a lake that Susan Smith herself had backed that vehicle into a lake, killing all of her children. The day of reckoning came. She's in the court. The evidence was clear. Why, Susan? Why, Susan, did you do this? Because my husband and I were having major marital issues, and my kids would have to go through this tremendous turmoil of being raised by two different parents, two different philosophies, two different whatever. And I knew it would be better for them to go to heaven than to have to go through a life like that. She was a Baptist, and she believed that those kids were in heaven. Guess what? The Baptist minister said at the funeral. Where did that minister put them? In heaven. Baptist minister said they were all in heaven. If that was true, then why is Susan Smith in jail? She was doing the best for her kids at the time. It was just a year after that. I had a 14-year-old girl that I took care of in the intensive care unit because she had tried to end her life the day before. Her dad, that I knew already, he was a patient of mine. The dad was just filled with grief over the fact that her 14-year-old daughter would do this. And so I talked to her after we had her recover from her attempted overdose and have her mind back. And I said to the young woman, "Why?" She said, "A year ago, my mom died in an auto accident, and I just wanted to see her so badly and be with her. And so I knew if this happened, I would be able to be with my mother." Also a Baptist. The father was in the room. He's Baptist as well. And I told her very plainly, when you hear something that's that much of a lie and it caused that much of a consequence, don't beat around the bush. Lovingly tell the truth. And I said to her, you know what? If you would have been successful, you would have not seen your mother. Really? I wouldn't have seen her? I said, no. Your mother is sleeping in the grave until Jesus comes. And you would have been in the death of sleep and not seeing your mother. She says, no one has ever told me that. I would have never been interested in ending my life if I would have known that. But I said it in such a way that I think the Holy Spirit accompanied the truth, and she believed what I said. She also knew about what type of physician I was from her father beforehand. And so I walked out of the room, and the Baptist father followed me and said, "Dr. Nedley, thank you so much for telling her that." He says, "You may not know this, but as a Baptist, we don't believe that, but I want to thank you so much for telling her that." Beliefs matter. Beliefs matter, and they matter in regards to mental health in particular. But the true religion of Christ is going to be a potent soother of the nerves. Now, this is the article that was published in the peer-reviewed journal called the Nedley Depression Hit Hypothesis, Identifying Depression as Causes, where we talk about over the 100 causes of depression and how if you have 4 different categories, you're going to end up with depression or anxiety. And our program is based upon this. If you come to and get your certified training in this, you will learn about these 10 categories and principles. And you will learn how we can reverse these 10 categories and principles, and how depression and anxiety does not need to be a lifetime illness. It can be completely eliminated, and you can become far more functional with a far higher mental and emotional intelligence. The 10 hit categories, we'll just mention them there so you can see them on the screen, but you will see a combination of at least 4 of those in any mental illness. One is not enough to do it. Some people think one will do it by itself, but it's going to be several of those hit categories, and we'll go into that more in the late afternoon session. By the way, I'm giving 2 sessions here, one for the general attendees at 2 o'clock every day right here, and then one at 3:45 for the select group that is going to be certified. And that's when you'll learn how to be a health coach and how to be able to really help people apply these principles. Notice this in Matthew chapter 10. Remember, Matthew 9 tells about the threefold ministry of Christ. Matthew 10, he's now saying to the apostles. And then later on, in Luke 10, he sends out 70 to do evangelism. This was the evangelism team that was going out. And he said, as you go preach, saying the kingdom of heaven is at hand, and the first thing he tells them to do, besides what comes out of their mouth, is to do what? Heal the sick. He doesn't say those to the right of Peter and John are going to be involved in the healing ministry, and those to the left of Peter and John are going to be involved in the preaching ministry. He tells everyone to be involved in both. Cleanse the lepers, raise the dead, cast out devils. Freely ye have received, freely give. And the casting out of devils, a lot of that is mental illness aspects of things. I can tell you the devil's playground is mental illness. The devil loves for humanity to suffer from mental illnesses because he knows how much Christ suffers when we're suffering from those things, and so he really desires to put everything in our place for us to have mental illness. And in a way, it's either devil, and sometimes people don't understand demon possession versus demon harassment. I've had a lot of individuals when someone's schizophrenic and they have hallucinations and all that think that that's not schizophrenia, it's demon possession. And actually, I'm more worried about people that don't have hallucinations and don't have those psychotic things and are persistently going against their own conscience, because those are the ones that are more likely to be demon-possessed. You know, we're told when Christ cast out the demons, these were individuals who were coming to Christ. They were trapped in sin, but they were coming to Christ because they had an attraction to change, and the demons would speak out of them, but they had a willingness for their demons to leave them. After that miracle, Ellen White says, in the book Desire of Ages, that far more problematic were the cases of the scribes and Pharisees and Christ's critics. And she says, those were also demon-possessed, but they were showing it in different ways. They were demon-possessed, but they felt no need, because they were just trying to go contrary to Christ. Their whole goal was to put him down because of jealousy and envy and those type of things. And she says that demon possession could not be cured. And so the ones that are coming to you in your community program, the fact that they have an interest in potentially changing some things to help out, that is demon possession that you can actually help them by putting them at the feet of the master and the other ways for them changing their mind. The critics that are out there just to criticize and bring down and those type of things, when you're criticizing the Lord's agents, that is a more sign of demon possession than having strange things occur in your life that you're wanting to get rid of. Do you guys understand that? Does that make sense? And maybe I should show you that quote. If you're wondering about it, that quote, we can show that to you. So, he did not wish the medical missionary work to be separated from the gospel work. That's speaking of Christ. The medical missionary work is not to be what? Separated from the gospel work. You know, sometimes you'll run across health programs where it's all about what you should do, but there's no power in regards to how are you going to do all these things. And that's kind of a form of legalism. So you can be a health evangelist that is just into legalism because you're not introducing them to the Spirit of God that can help them actually keep all of these things. And so that's why, one of the reasons why they need to be combined. But then you also have gospel workers, or quotes, gospel evangelists that'll sit up here, maybe even on this podium, and criticize the health message and ridicule those who are trying to be plant-based or trying to exercise or those sorts of things. That's the gospel work separated from the medical missionary work. God wants his threefold ministry to be combined. Let's not leave out any part of it. Notice these are to what? The medical missionary work and the gospel work, these are to do what? Blend. The medical missionary work is to be regarded as the what? The pioneer work. Why is it the pioneer work? Because you will get people interested in the gospel who never would have come to a Revelation series. They never would have come to a Daniel series. They never would have darkened the door if you'd have, for a Bible study, and they never would have allowed you into their home for a Bible study. It's just amazing. You know, I work with a pastor evangelist who understands cognitive behavioral therapy very well in our program, and he says, this is evangelism on steroids, every one of these programs. It is evangelism on steroids because we're getting a minimum of 2 to 3 people completely being converted to the gospel message who would have never come to a church, period. Per program, and there's 20 in each program. And there's a program that recently, when you take a look at the after effects of the program, 18 out of 21. 18 out of 21. That's almost 90% of the attendees thoroughly converted as a result of medical missionary work who never would have come to an evangelistic series or listened to a preacher in your church. But now they are listening to a preacher in your church as a result of their health care needs and coming to a place which helped to meet those needs and educate them and help change their minds. So the medical missionary work is to regard as the pioneer work. You want to reach the unchurched in your area? You want to reach the wealthy? You want to reach people that are hard to reach? I would encourage you you don't have to be a health professional at all. You just have to learn how to be a health coach, and every one of our churches, God desires to be mini sanitariums all over the place where people can go to get their real mental health issues or physical health issues solved. It is to be the means, the medical missionary work will be the means of doing what? Breaking down prejudice. Breaking down prejudice. And as the right arm is to open doors for the gospel message. Let me tell you about an atheist in our program that came. This atheist wanted to see us because he was on benzos, chronic benzos, lorazepam. I can't remember if it was lorazepam or alprazolam, Xanax and Ativan, or what they're known in the United States. And he had been on them for several years, and he couldn't get off of them. Super high anxiety, and he realized it was adversely affecting his relationship. These are frontal lobe suppressants. They're a little bit like alcohol in a pill. They're going to increase your risk of dementia. They're going to cause relationship issues because your frontal lobe is down and you don't have that purpose and principle. And he looked everywhere, and he realized this is very tough to get off of these drugs, almost impossible. And we had published a study on getting off benzos. In fact, when people come to our program, they're going to be off their benzos in 10 to 17 days, and their anxiety is going to be far less than when they were on the benzos, which they think is impossible to do. And so we had published a study on benzos, actually in our community program, because our community program also shows benzo reduction, even though it's not a benzo reduction program, it's a depression and anxiety recovery program. But when we take care of the underlying reasons why mental illness exists, why depression and anxiety exists, then we don't have the need for these cover jobs that are causing, or cover agents that are causing frontal lobe suppression. So he was not only an atheist, he was a licensed counselor. So he's a licensed mental health professional. And he's coming to our program, and everyone has to cycle through the spiritual counselor, which sometimes these atheists say, I'm not interested at all in spiritual things. And what we'll tell them is, just go to those presentations and agree with what you can agree with, and it will help you. We're not asking you to necessarily agree with everything. But then they have the chance in the individual session to talk about some of their core issues. And in this individual session, our spiritual counselor asked the leading question: how satisfied are you with your life? How what? Satisfied are you with your life? Second question, and he went into the story about how he wasn't satisfied and why he thought he wasn't satisfied. Then he said, are any of your issues you think related to lies you've been told? Or do you think any of your issues might be due to lies that you've told others? And it opened up a whole nother discussion. The next question was, has anyone abused you, or have you been an abuser? The next question was, are any of your issues, do you think, related to lack of faithfulness in regards to sexual intimacy? And that opened up a whole nother discussion. He had been married for 15 years, but there were issues. The next question was, what about your other health practices? Are there any health practices? Obviously, you want to give up the benzos, but are there any other health practices that you think could be improved upon? So he went into that. Then the next question, final question is, do you have any issues with authority? How is your relationships with authority figures in the workplace? You know, were there issues with authority figures in your parents growing up? And at the end of that, it was just a 30-minute, because that's all he gets for the screening, a 30-minute screening. The end of it, this licensed counselor said to our spiritual counselor, where did you learn to take an inventory like that? Because you have learned more about me in 30 minutes in core issues than I've ever been able to learn by doing an intake in 30 minutes with my professional counseling. So where did you get that from? Do you know what our spiritual counselor said to this atheist? I got it from God. He says, what do you mean? He said, all I asked you were principles of the 10 commandments, the last 6 commandments. The atheist says, I don't even know what the commandments say. He said, okay, so my first assignment for you is to read Exodus 20, verses 3 to the end of the 10 commandments. So you can learn about those 10 commandments, because if we want to get to the core of the issues that are causing your problem, the commandment is that lens that will get to the core of the issues. Now, we sometimes are fearful of the commandments. One of the most common statements this religion is called Seventh-day Adventists. We're at a Seventh-day Adventist camp. But there was a phrase that Ellen White liked to use about true Seventh-day Adventists that had thoroughly been converted. She called them God's commandment-keeping people. 4 words, repeatedly. God's what? Commandment-keeping people. And the beginning of the commandments starts out by saying in Exodus, I am the God that brought you out of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Do you think God can still do that for people today when they're in bondage? This man was in bondage. He was totally addicted to his benzos. And as a result of coming to this program and now being open to an atheist reading the 10 Commandments, and by the way, atheists, this is in fact, our spiritual counselor has written a book on this. I don't know if it's in your ABC or not. It's called The Law and Its Logic. The Law and Its Logic, and the subtitle is Where Christians and Atheists Agree. It turns out there's been a survey of atheists, and I told you what political party they're most likely a part of in America, but there's a survey of atheists that show the supermajority of them. By supermajority means more than 2/3, but it's in the high 70s. And if you look at all of America itself, it's in the 90s. Believe that we should keep those last 6 commandments. They actually don't believe in committing adultery. He had talked about some of the issues in regards to sexual intimacy, and he recognized that this was not healthy. It was not good to be doing this. He didn't believe in stealing. By the way, why did he talk about abuse? Abuse is stealing from somebody. That's the thou shalt not steal. By the way, are you satisfied with your life? The 10th commandment is thou shalt not covet. Why does God not want us to be coveting? Because he wants us to be satisfied in our thoughts with our life. Why was he talking about, is some of this due to deception and lies? That's the 9th commandment, thou shalt not lie. Why was he talking about health habits? That's the 6th commandment, thou shalt not kill. Some people might not be committing suicide, but they are actually committing suicide with their fork. What does that mean? They're eating foods that are going to accelerate their demise. And then authority figures is about honoring our father and our mother. And it turns out God's name is not associated with any of the last 5 commandments for a good reason. God doesn't want himself associated with those things: killing, stealing, lying. That's not at all to do with God. But if we're keeping the first 5 commandments where God's name is at, we will have solutions to the other 5. And those first 5 commandments, in fact, the last commandment, there's never been a law passed against coveting. It's not a behavior. It's only about your thoughts. God is interested in what you're thinking. He wants us to be satisfied in our thoughts. And the first commandment is also not about behavior. It's about God being our number 1 priority in our life. And if we have God the number 1 priority in our life, and we keep the 2nd and the 3rd and the 4th and the 5th commandment, we will be set up to be very resistant to mental illness. And we'll be able to recover. If we haven't been resistant, we'll be able to recover if we follow those principles of those commandments. Those commandments will get people out of bondage. So the health message is called the entering wedge. And I'm going to skip through because I told too many stories here, since we're getting towards the end. Natural means used in accordance with God's will bring about what? Supernatural results. We often ask for a miracle. she says, but the Lord directs the mind to what? Somewhat simple remedy. We ask to be kept from the pestilence that walketh in darkness, that is stalking with such power throughout the world. We are then to do what? Cooperate with God. This is what can happen in every one of your churches by having a mini sanitarium. You can open up natural means that can be very healthy for them and begin and even be directly involved in that healing process. No portion of the Lord's vineyard has greater possibilities for doing good than the sanitarium, she says. And you know, one of the nice things about putting on programs in your churches, when you're putting on health programs, when Christ called his disciples, he told them that he was going to teach them to become what? Fishers of what? Fishers of men. We often misunderstand that because we think of the rod and reel. One fisherman out there. Were Peter and John doing that? How did they catch fish? It was in nets. In order to catch fish in nets, you have to have a team with you, working together as a team. And I can tell you, when you have your healing programs, whether it's depression recovery, whether it's diabetes undone, whether it's our residential program, it's a team of godly workers together that bring about amazing results and amazing changes in mind in your community members there. Often the ones that you think are most resistant to the Spirit of God will actually be very receptive when they come into that net, per se. So we are to be fishers of men the way Christ taught, through a net and through a team. No greater possibility for doing good than the sanitarium. And the sanitarium is not one person. It's not even two people. It's a team. Sanitariums are needed in which successful medical and surgical work can be done. Now, her idea of a professional sanitarium included those things. These institutions conducted in accordance with the will of God would remove prejudice and call our work into favorable notice. The highest aim of the workers in these institutions, these health centers, is to be the what? Spiritual health of the patient. This is often neglected today, even in some of our Adventist hospitals. We're interested in just getting them healed from their physical disease and getting them out, but you don't realize they're coming back unless they have spiritual healing. One of the hospital administrators has figured this out. He's a president over 6 hospitals there in Northern California. And now they get penalized. If you discharge a patient from a hospital and they get readmitted within 30 days, the hospital has to eat that. They don't get any payment from that at all. And so he found out we have a certificate program at Weimar. It's called the Health Evangelism and Leadership Training course. And he's over 6 hospitals, and he said every discharge, when it's a disease where lifestyle can be involved, every discharge, we want your students who graduated from your health program to go into that home and tell those patients how to live. I said, you know, they're also taught the spiritual part. It's called Health Evangelism and Leadership Training for him. And they might actually be doing Bible studies in the home. What would you say about that? He says, I don't care if they do Bible studies, as long as they don't come back to the hospital and they have healing and they have a change of mind and they know what habits they need to change, we will pay them. And so they actually get very good income from just going into those discharged patients. The highest aim of those workers is to be the what health of the patient? The spiritual health of the patient. When we heal someone spiritually, it's a lot easier for them to stay on a plant-based diet. It's a lot easier to have relationships that are healed. Successful evangelistic work can be done in connection with medical missionary work. As you saw, the title here was Evangelism of today's talk. Successful evangelistic work can be done in connection with what? Medical missionary work. It is as these lines of work are united that we may expect to gather the most precious fruit for the Lord. Instruction she gave to a pastor: had you carried the work forward in the lines in which God intended you to, had you done what type of work? Medical missionary work. What is his profession? He's a pastor. He was seen as a successful pastor, but she says, had you done medical missionary work trying to heal soul and what else? Body, and we might also put mind in there, you would have seen hundreds and thousands coming into the truth. We want to see evangelism revived? This is the way to do it. And then her last instruction, this is when she gave her last public testimony at a general conference. I believe it was 2013. She said this: I wish to tell you soon that there will be no work done in ministerial lines but medical missionary work. She was looking forward to the time when the preaching of truth would be outlawed and banned. Do you think that might happen in Canada someday? It might. I even hear in Canada that if you quote the 7th commandment, you might even be arrested. You know, it's kind of bordering on that. And I know in some places, you know, California is kind of very much like Canada, and we're in California. But we still teach the 7th commandment and all the other commandments as well. If we end up going to jail, we'll end up going to jail, but we're going to be part of the healing ministry. But she's looking to the point where it would be outlawed and banned for anybody to teach truths that are biblical truths, but she said there'll still be conversions during those times. How will those conversions happen? It's through medical missionary work. So if you want to be working for God, even when the laws change, medical missionary work is the way to do it. So there's many reasons for the health message. There's financial reasons that are wonderful. We could go into that. God wants his people to be healthy. He wants you to also take up this message. It's also what Christ did, and it helps interpret the gospel to men like no other work can do. It removes barriers. It reaches the unchurched, reaches the higher classes, all ages and classes, and it opens the doors to sacred truth. We have seen this happen over and over again. Sacred truth is totally open when we do medical missionary work God's way, even those that had no interest in sacred truth before. I know one time I was asked a question as a young man when I attended a medical conference by the Adventist Church in the Southern Union, and it asked the question, does the health message have anything to do with salvation? They didn't give the answer, but they said 91% of the participants, or 95%, said it had nothing to do with salvation. That's because you don't understand the threefold ministry. Ellen White actually predicted we shall see the medical missionary work broadening and deepening at every point of its progress because of the inflowing of hundreds and thousands of streams until the whole earth is covered as the waters cover the sea. We want Jesus. We want to go home. If you want to go home, medical missionary work is the way to do it, because Christ is not coming until his people take up his healing ministry and spread it around the globe. Amen. When that happens, Christ will come and claim his people for his own. And then Ellen White answered the question about does the health message have anything to do with it. She said the light God has given on health reform is for what? Our salvation and the salvation of the world. That's evangelism, our salvation and the salvation of the world. And I'm hoping you're all encouraged to take up the work of medical missionary work, be your church small or large, and become mini sanitariums for Christ in your community. I've got 1 minute for questions if I end at 3:30. Sorry. Is there any questions that someone would like to ask? All right. Okay, if you could turn on number 2 mic, sir.
Number 2 and number 3. You actually have 15 minutes for questions.
I have 15 minutes.
If you're up to that. So those of you who would like to ask some questions, just raise up your hand. We'll have a couple mics walking around. And while people are thinking of their questions, maybe you could talk a little bit more about what's going to be presented the rest of the week.
Sure. Okay. So while we're waiting for some questions, so the rest of the week in the later afternoon session, the 3:45, is when the certification course begins to become certified to run depression and anxiety recovery programs in our community. I've talked a lot about depression. Actually, our data is just as good with anxiety. So anxiety is greatly helped by these principles as well. And so you'll learn about both, and you'll learn how to be a health coach for those who are struggling with these things, maybe even struggling with being on benzos or even other addictions, but even if they're not addicted, how we can get to the core of what is happening. And we have also, we'll teach you how to get even before and after data on this. One of the things that I should mention is, and we're sometimes asked this, as a mental health, because we are a mental health provider in California, we have this residential big depression and anxiety recovery program. They'll say, well, maybe I shouldn't touch on this per se, I'll just touch on this aspect of it. We have before and after data. You won't find any psychiatric clinic or hospital or residential program in Canada or in the US that shows you their before and after data. Why don't they? And so we have before and after data. We're very transparent about that. And so you have a lot of good studies that have been published in the scientific literature giving you confidence that this program does work and will help you a great deal. The other programs you might learn about, they're not going to have this extensive before and after data and tens of thousands of individuals. Yes?
Good afternoon. You were spot on in regards to all of us being ambassadors for Christ and doing missionary as best we can. But then one thing I'd like you to touch on is because you seem to talk about the stress that some of us do go through. I had a death experience, died for 2 minutes and 59 seconds, and it was too serene, and I wasn't told to come back and worship Satan or whatever. I was told to go back and spread the good news and the love. And most death experiences that I've encountered and spoke to, it's all the same story, and we all experience this type of thing. So what's your take on that?
Okay, so if I understand the question correctly, it's the question about near-death experiences. And so I assume that you're wondering whether what I was saying about death earlier is death really the cessation of life? Is that something that's actually true based on a lot of these stories of near-death experiences? So I'll tell you a couple of stories to help illustrate what I'm going to say.
That's what I meant by the whole experience was serene. It was like going through the valley of death.
Yeah. So first of all, I'll mention this. Whenever someone is hypoxic, for instance, I've run codes. Remember, I was internal medicine. I was director of an ICU. I have seen in my career of medical work, I have seen a lot of deaths and near deaths. And so in regards to the near deaths, where the heart stops and you're coding someone sometimes for 30 minutes and then you get them back, I have never had in my experience an individual to tell me about this story that you're hearing in these other things. So these are not commonplace, they're more rare. But they can happen. They can happen as a result of hypoxia. When you're low in oxygen, and I know this is a pilot, when you're actually going to go up very high, you have to know what it feels like to be low in oxygen. When you're low in oxygen, you'll have these out-of-body experiences that can be very serene. You'll hear about it, even the climbers on Mount Everest, they're climbing up and they see themselves from afar, climbing on this whole thing. That's due to hypoxia. So hypoxia and low oxygen can produce these type of feelings, and they are being translated as something that you're not going to die, you're going to enter in another phase of existence. And the story I'll tell you is about a patient who wasn't mine, but I was on the floor when she died. They had coded her. The emergency room physician had been there and coded her. She was, they wanted, he had already pronounced her dead. The whole thing, the family had been talked to. The family was leaving. They had called the funeral home. And now I'm on the floor. It's early in the morning. It's about 7 a.m., and there's not other doctors there. And they said, Dr. Nedley, come in. She's moving. She's moving. And they just pronounced her dead. Everybody's left. So I go in. She's not only moving, she's breathing. She has come back. And so after about 15 minutes after she revives, her mind is actually still there. And so the nurses are all gathered around. Everyone is sitting there listening to this. And I said, ma'am, what do you remember? What did you experience? She goes, I was eating breakfast, same story the nurses told me. And then I couldn't breathe, and just everything went black. I said, did you see any light? Did you see anything like this? She says, I didn't see anything. It was like I was just in a sleep. And then, as I start coming back, I see this crowd around me. And then I see you and all of that. And then with all of those people around, there's Catholics, there's Protestants, there's atheists around, I said, what this woman has testified to is exactly what the Bible says happens when you die. It's just a sleep. And so I think we get carried away by some of these stories, but death is the cessation of life. All right, any other questions?
Thank you, Dr. Nedley. My question is, why the message is so changing in the churches? I go to the largest church in BC, and I have had this conversation. I'm vegan since I was a child without being in Adventism, even though I was surrounded in an Adventist community unknowingly. And I speak to 3 pastors about, because they've allowed meat in now, just this year. The church that I left allowed meat in. And I'm just shocked, because I just feel we're lowering the bar so much. And what are we going to have? Instead of being like real beacons in our embodiment, it affects consciousness, which I'm so looking forward to your other talks through the week, emotional health and all those things. But I'm not hearing it. I resuscitated in your talk today because I'm surrounded by people at the camp even who don't even think it's important. And I will be just stunned and probably not attend anymore if they allow meat into the church and serve it in the cafeteria and all that stuff, So I'm just wondering, why are we being so silent? I spoke to a pastor this morning, Morning Manna, and I went up to him and I asked this question, and he just said, oh, listen, Neil Nedley, Dr. Neil Nedley, he talks about this, meaning like only you get to speak about that and nobody else has to be held accountable. I mean, I think I just would like that clarification. And do you know the book, which I haven't read, where Ellen White speaks about the doctors and the pastors need to be vegetarian? Thank you.
Okay, so the question is, and I'll give you some data behind this. At the time the Adventist Health Study was first run in Southern California, before there was much evidence, at the time the Adventist Health Study was first run, vegetarianism was thought to be a disease in the medical profession. If you told someone you're a vegetarian, they knew you had a disease because it wasn't compatible with good, healthy living. The percentage of Adventists who were vegetarian at that time was 50%. Why were they vegetarian where there wasn't the medical evidence? It was their faith. It was their faith and their interpretation of inspired writings. Now the evidence is overwhelming, very overwhelming. Science is very clear. Plant-based vegetarians are going to live longer. I know one that's 100 years old that's still traveling around the world on his own power. He still drives a red sports car. His mind is as sharp as can be. All of that. In fact, he spoke to 50,000 in Madagascar last week because you can live to 100, but you don't see 100-year-olds with the energy that he has and the mind that he has. And he's a nutritionist as well as a medical doctor. But he preaches the plant-based vegetarian diet. And, of course, he has not only his personal evidence, but the evidence that's accumulated. Do you know what percentage of Adventists in Southern California are vegetarian now? It's 25%. So now that the evidence is very clear, it's less. What does that mean? That means our right arm in our church also needs to be healed. I was going to go into the Luke chapter 6, Christ's healing of the right arm. The right arm is the one that opened doors for the gospel message. That's what the health message is about. And so, now, having said that, meat eating is not a test of fellowship. If you're eating clean meat, of course, you can still be a Seventh-day Adventist, you can join the church, and we talk about clean versus unclean. By the way, a lot of people misunderstand that. Why do we do clean versus unclean? If you're eating clean meat, you might get a disease from the clean meat, but you're not going to pass it easily to others. All of these epidemics, from the flu epidemic to the COVID epidemic to the AIDS epidemic, all of those started as a result of either having sex, which may have occurred with AIDS. It was actually in chimpanzees in the Congo. You can actually trace it all the way back where the AIDS virus started. So they were either eating chimpanzee or they were having sex with chimpanzee. So you're unresponsible if you're eating unclean meat because you could get a disease from that unclean meat that could cause billions and trillions of dollar problems and a lot of premature deaths around the world. And by the way, the World Health Organization knows this. And instead of putting all these other mandates, the mandate that would be the best public health prevention would be the banning of eating unclean meat. You ban that for the nation, and you will not have the next epidemic come in. And so that should be something that should be well publicized. Why won't they do that? One World Health Organization official told me if they do that, it would make the Bible look like a health book. And they think science and the Bible should be totally divorced from each other. And they don't realize we wouldn't have science without the Bible. It was Daniel's prospective study that started us knowing how to do clinical studies. And so the Bible and science go hand in hand. But where we were to be in our churches is we were to have our potlucks vegetarian. Why is that? It's part of education. It's helping people to realize we can eat healthy food that can also be tasty. And if there's a way that you can have healthy food that's also tasty, then why would you go back to the other way? And so our potlucks were to be an educational part of it. It's part of the threefold ministry that's there. But thank you for your comments, and I do agree that we need to revive our church in regards to the threefold ministry. That's why I'm preaching here today. All right, question up here.
There's one question there, and then one here, and then one there, and that'll be all.
Okay.
So go ahead there.
You mentioned schizophrenia is devil possession. Is it always schizophrenia? Is it always a diagnosis? Is that always devil possession?
Yes. So let me explain what I said and what I didn't say. I said a lot of times people believe that schizophrenia is demon possession. It's most often not. So schizophrenia is not demon possession. It's actually a disease of the mind per se. Now there's anatomy for demon possession, and this we're told in Scripture and Spirit of Prophecy, demon possession is allowed. Demons can't inhabit you unless you give them permission. How do you give them permission? By continually violating your conscience and rebelling against the word of the Lord. You know God says this, and you continually go against it. And that's when demons are allowed to be able to come in and start controlling you. And those schizophrenics don't have that history. Most of them don't have that history. They haven't been rebelling against the Lord. They haven't been doing things like that. But they do have a biochemical illness in their brain that needs to be helped. and it can be through a comprehensive approach. All right, so next question.
Yes, I just want to know how long is the training that you offer? Not the one that you're offering this week, but the one you're talking, and how can you enroll?
Yeah, if you're not taking it this week, there are other ways that you can take it. Our Emotional Intelligence Summit every March has a training before the EQ Summit. And you can come to Weimar for hands-on training. There's also an online training. It's a 17-hour course, and you have to take a test afterwards, and so you can do that as well. All of those will cost significantly more than what you're able to get it here live. All right, another question. I heard there's someone else.
Hello.
Sorry.
If someone could stand
I
up
have
so
a
I
mic.
can try to read your lips. I can't tell where it's coming from.
Hi. I noticed that the
yes.
PowerPoint that was the most informative to me disappeared. It was a 10-point, basically sharing how we can get a depressed mind through less blood flow to the frontal lobe.
Yes.
And if you could highlight most of those points, that would be helpful as a preventative measure for those that are worried about mental health problems. One of them was toxic, I saw, and then some others.
Yes, so we are going to be going into more details in the late afternoon training out of all of those. So you'll get a lot more details in regards to all of those. But due to your request, I will see if we can put this back up on the screen. So those are what we call the 10 hit categories. These are categories of causes that have been shown to be very much related to mental illness. You can suffer from 1 or 2 or 3 of those and not get mental illness. The brain's pretty resilient. But once that 4th cause comes about, that's when it's going to start happening. And the more hits you have pile up, the more severe the mental illness ends up becoming. All right, and is there, I might have already passed my 3:45 mark. Go ahead.
I was told that I ignored the people that were behind me. So we've got 2 quick questions, right?
In line with the first question about a near-death experience, the difference between a near-death experience and a death experience is near-death is not dead. And so just because a person's heart stops, they're not dead. You know, because in surgery, we stop people's hearts.
Absolutely.
Heart
you're
transplants
absolutely
or
correct.
bypass surgeries. So that is not death. Death is necrosis of the cells. And so at this point, you know, again, there are not death experiences that have been told. There are near-death. Lazarus in the Bible is a clear case of he was dead for 4 days, and he had no stories of the afterlife.
And I might also add that that person that was pronounced dead, even though it said that in the chart, was not really dead. So otherwise, there would have been not that type of experience afterwards. But it was near death. Okay, go ahead. Last question.
Yes, Doctor. I'm very happy to be here today, and I'm very happy with your presentation, because these are the things that which I've been wondering for a long time, that this health reform is not being promoted in our churches in various places. Most of our churches are very mute about these things, and most of our churches, they are cooking the flesh food for them to eat right there in the church. I'm wondering, why is the system allowing these things to go on? And number 2, we who cannot come to Weimar for training, how can we in our localities get trained for health health ministry?
Okay, so I think the question is about how can we get more training in regards to health initiatives. And of course, there's a training going on here at this camp meeting. We also have trainings, as I mentioned, at Weimar. And we also have a longer program, the Health Certificate Program at Weimar. I'm sure there's other ways that we can get trained, or you can get trained in regards to maybe other certified programs, but those are the big 3 ways that you know, we would highly recommend that I'm associated with. But thank you very much for your questions and your attention today.
Yeah. So yeah, please go ahead. And I want to thank Dr. Nedley very much for being here, and also Erica, would you mind standing up? Mrs. Nedley is here as well, so we appreciate them both being here. And I'm sorry if we didn't get your question today, but we will have question and answers every day during the week. So if I missed somebody, I apologize. It wasn't on purpose. Okay, so we'll see everybody tomorrow at 2 o'clock, same place, and look forward to seeing everybody. Thanks again. Oh,
Yes.
yeah, and if you want to register for the training, come and see me, and I'll get your name and your phone number. There's about 8 spots left. Okay. Come on, let me write it down.